right, so you know me by now. I'm kind of afraid that I'll not have enough material, but we'll probably end up going over. So that's kind of how I roll, right? So we're gonna by the time I end tonight, I need to be through chapter 18, and there's I mean, like any other part of the Bible, there's lots of good stuff there, but I think it's something that be somewhat quickly gone over if we don't get out of 17. But that's going to be the where we need to do some work tonight. Okay, so where we left off in chapter 17, we were looking at Paul when he'd gone to Athens, addressing the Areopagus, speaking to folks who really didn't know who Jehovah God was. They had a variety of belief systems, Epicurean, cynics, all that good stuff, and tried to explain to them that this is the one unifying God that is underpinning all of your desires. Everything you're looking for is in Jehovah God. And sometimes my examples are somewhat whimsical, I guess, but I would contend that based on what I'm reading here in the Bible, in Acts and in other parts, everybody is kind of built and designed to seek after God in a real sense, right? There's something within us that seeks God, but things get in the way of that, right? That's kind of the problem with the human existence. And when I say a whimsical example, has anybody ever seen the Lord of the Rings movies? Okay, all right. I know you have, Peter. Okay. So Tolkien, the author, was an English author, and he was a colleague of C.S. Lewis, and they did a lot of also religious discourse with the Church of England and others, arguably religious people, but it was kind of a mindset amongst that part of the academia back then, especially with C.S. Lewis, and they wrote back and forth together quite often. But there was a book that Tolkien wrote before The Lord of the Rings called The Silmarillion. And in that book, there was a overarching god. His name was Anu, and he created these elves, right? And there came a point in the story of this mythology that he wrote that this god Anu had triggered something within the elves to come back to their version of heaven, to their version of the promised land, and the elves, when they got this message, there were some that heard it, and that message basically said, "Go to the west, get on a ship, and go over the sundering sea to this other continent." And these were the faithful, the Nodoli. Then there was another group of elves, I can't remember their name, but they heard the message and they only went so far. They didn't actually leave the shores, but they kind of stopped where they were because they got comfortable, didn't want to take the rest of that journey, right? Can't remember what their name was. But then there was another group called the Avari, and they heard the message and wanted nothing to do with it. They were terrified of it and said, "We're not even doing this." And they were called the Dark Elves. So this mindset of understanding, of being associated with the church and learning about human nature kind of pervades their work, and this kind of is a very clear parallel, I think, to how humans are wired too. There are some who have a strong desire to be faithful, some who let life's distractions get in the way, and others who want absolutely nothing to do with it, right? So it's just interesting how sometimes the literature will parallel what's happening in nature and even what we see happening in the Bible too. So I just thought that was an interesting story. I hope it's not too whimsical. But that being said, why don't we, I was going to go to, at this point, I got some stuff pulled up on the web browser. I know this is not going to be very visible, but what I've tried to do is establish, I've done some internet searching, try to find the timeline of human existence and religion. Now, this particular timeline goes back to 100,000 BC, which probably doesn't fit in with the actual timeline, but this particular author is taken and done a review of, there's classes on religions, things like that, but as much as possible, this author has tried to collect all known religions and try to situate them somewhere in time and group them by continent as well. So, if we start here, 100,000 BC, Africa had animism. Okay, so maybe some dating problems there, but when we think of animism, it's tribal type of stuff, right? They're literally have graven images, things like that. There's Aboriginal religions over here in New Guinea, more animism. As we get down to Africa, even more animism. Europe has polytheism. Think the Celtics, right? Germanic tribes, these different gods that they've created. We go down here to Africa again. We got what's called Proto-Nostralic, Berber. Berber is a North African animism type of religion. Yoruba, and none of this some of these may not resonate or be very familiar. Shamanism in the Middle East around 10,000 BC. More shamanism in Central America. So shamans, the religious person within the community, right? This person's kind of, they got their little, I shouldn't make fun of it, but has some sort of right to administer spiritual things. And it's either feelings, things they made up, or local cultural things where they've created their own religion, right? East Africa, they've got more shamanism, and it's really kind of all across the world, kind of a disorganized religion. Advancing forward about 5,000 BC, we see there's historical record of Chinese shamanism. It's called Wuism. Even in the Arctic, in the Nordic areas, Siddhya shamanism. Moving forward, we've got Korean history, Muism, archaic India. And actually, I missed some on the columns over here. There's going to be South America coming up here too. As we move forward, this author finds Bantu, Nilotic, Egyptian, around 3000 BC, Canaanite, Indo-Iranian, Phoenician, Baltic. Finally, we get to the Greek polytheism, Finnish, more Nordic type of stuff, more shamanism. Here's the start of some Germanic stuff in Europe, around 1500 BC, Vedic and polytheism in India, kind of the beginnings of Hinduism here about 500 years later. Jainism, which is closely related to Hinduism, and Zoroastrianism. So I think some of these we might have heard of by now, right? Some of these are probably in our history books, but shamanism was kind of this overall arcing type of setup back in the very older days. Greco-Roman, Ethiopian, Anasazi, North America, Native American, Mississippian in North America as well, and really on and on, right? We got Confucianism, Tengronism, Shinto, Taoism in East Asia, Japan, more Buddhism in India, right? Hellenistic, Slavic, there's our Celtic polytheism in Europe. Hellenism starting in 500 BC or so that's growth of the Greek culture. Getting out to around 0 AD, we've got, I have no idea what Hermeticism is, but then we have Mithraism, Christianity, starting in the Middle East. More Buddhism, Hopewell, and then as we advance forward to more of the current age, here's our Norse in Europe, Neoplatonism. I don't know what that is. Islam starting around 500 AD, and then we go through a whole bunch of stuff in the Middle East. More subdivisions of Islam, Shia Islam, religion centered around Gnosticism, Eastern Orthodox, Catholicism, and then what I got going on over here? We got the Inca polytheism going on in South America, Iroquois in North America, Pueblo in North America, Plateau Indians, Plain Indians, Haitian voodoo, interesting, right? We have, he's calling Reformed Judaism in 1750, start to get into the modern era, and we've got, I don't know what all this stuff is in Europe. They got Wicca, that's a recent one, right? I don't know what Anthroposophy is, Thelema, Ramova, Rodnovery, the Golden Dawn. I have no idea what that stuff is. But Scientology, look at that. We've heard of that one, right? So I think there's probably inaccuracies here. My point of putting this together is even in times past and in 0 AD, as coming into the time of Christ and in the time of the New Testament, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the world. whole bunch of different religions, different points of view. It's not just what we find in the Bible. We see a little piece of Epicurean, a little piece of Stoicism. There's all this other stuff going on too. So how does the gospel interact with all this other stuff, right? And I think that's what I would like to try to get out of this class here, if we can, by the conclusion. Because it is a broad array of beliefs, a broad array of seeking answers to questions that maybe they don't even know the question to ask, and here's the answer for it, right? But there's so many different points of view out there. How does the gospel interface with all this? So with that in mind, I'm going to flip over to current world population. So this was up to date as of yesterday anyway, when I took the snapshot. 8.142 billion people. Back in the day, that was probably 300 million or so, less than that. We've increased in size of humanity and souls by over, 60-fold or so. There's a lot more people in the world than there were then. On the other hand, and I guess here's a visual of what a billion looks like, a million pennies stacked one after another is 4 times the height of the Empire State Building. Ever think about that? That's the one way to visualize what a million looks like. So the Empire State Building, I don't know how tall it is, but a million pennies stacked up is 4 times the height of that. A billion is 158 times the height of Mount Everest. How tall is Mount Everest? About 15,000 feet. So 158 times 15,000, that's a pretty tall stack of pennies, isn't it? Then finally, if you get a trillion, it's a lot more. And I personally, I've had the benefit of, I went to China twice in my career, and when I was going to a city called Suzhou, and when you land at Shanghai and go to Suzhou, it's about 50 miles apart. And in that 50 miles on the bus ride, it is skyscraper after skyscraper after skyscraper after skyscraper, unbroken and unending. And it's not just that corridor, it's not there for tourists, it's eye candy. It's the entire 50-mile stretch of that part of the country. And they're full of people. That's how many people there are in this world. And it's just overwhelming and daunting. And in China in particular, most of the people live along the coast. So that billion or so they have are all clustered in that one area. So it's really quite overwhelming to see the amount of humanity all pressed together in one place. I think India's taken over recently in population. Point is, there's a lot of people. So when we look at some demographics around around what people follow today, again, it's found on the internet, so it must be right? I would say it's directionally correct. When we look at this is something I would almost call it a heat map type of thing, which shows visually, here's where the clusters of the different characteristics are. So trying to categorize information is what this is trying to do. So when we look at Christian religion, of that 8.1 billion or so, about a third of people have some sort of allegiance or association with Christianity. So either Catholic, Baptist, whatever their belief system, that is how they associate, right? So within the United States, we see it's quite prominent. About probably 80% of the folks or so. Mexico more so. Brazil. Africa is a different story. We got quite a mix of Muslim amongst the different countries. Europe is mainly a Christian continent. India, look at that, mostly Hindu and Jainism, right? I guess there's an outlier here. I forgot Israel. Look, they're mostly Jewish, but that's the only country on earth that's really like that. A little slice over here, maybe in the United States. Muslim, about 22, maybe almost 1 in 4 people are Muslim. So they're scattered here across little instances of it here in the Caribbean and North South America, but mainly in Africa and the Middle East, right? So Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Turkey, and other places, Muslim religion, Egypt. And finally, we get this other. So I'm not really sure. Well, maybe I could figure that out. In this view, other, I'm not exactly sure what it is here in China. India, you probably got more Zoroastrianism, stuff like that, Buddhism. Oh no, there's Buddhism, 7.2. Yeah, right there in the orange. Okay. And so Japan's got a bunch of that. Again, I'm trying to do some compare and contrast here. We had a whole bunch of religions back then, and guess what? We do today too. So there's really nothing different. I feel like I'm being Mr. Obvious here. But it is the opportunity statement, if you will. When we're doing at work, when we do problem solving, this is the opportunity statement. Folks who are arguably looking for God, but here they're looking for it in a lot of different places. So how do we figure out how to get that message to them? How do we figure out how to get it to the message of the folks who want, who are demonstrating that desire to move towards true Christianity, right? So I won't go too much further into there. And I debated with myself about whether to put this up, but I thought I might do it, just for food for thought. And Wikipedia is absolutely right in everything, right? There's data sources that they go to try to gather some demographics, but if you just look up Church of Christ on Wikipedia, you got they estimate about 2 million members worldwide, about 1.1 million in the United States. And if you think about it, the ratios kind of work out. If you think about Lafayette, we got about 188,000 people here, maybe 200 here on a good day. There might be some other churches in the area, another 80 or so. Still a pretty lopsided type of arrangement, isn't it? It's the one to many. So everybody's wondering, what kind of point am I trying to make with this? We can look at it one of two different ways. We can say, how can the few possibly be right? Which this is something in my own journey, I've kind of I've asked that same question. But I also look at it this way. When I was looking for God at my lowest place ever, not too long ago, I started trying to answer the question, what does Jesus want me to do? You are my friends if you do whatever I say. And that, in a very rapid sense, brought me back to what I'm learning here and is being taught here amongst the brethren. I can't say it any less ambiguously than that, other than I believe in what I'm doing is right, and it's what I find in the Bible, what God tells me to do. Those are the things I must obey to do. So I think that does characterize us in a way. We're looking to not just read the Bible, we're looking to understand what's there and obey what's there as well. And I think that's what we find in the New Testament as we browse through this. And so even in the case of Paul preaching to the folks in Athens at the Areopagus, what happened here? He told them about the God that they were seeking, and therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art or man's devising. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance to this all by raising him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, "We will hear you again on this matter." So Paul departed from among them. So, I don't know, I don't want to make too much of this, but when some mocked, there's some kind of internal, I don't want to say struggle going on, but internal predisposition going on that they don't want to hear this word. It's kind of what I see there, right? Their hearts aren't in the right place to really be submissive to God. Here I am making a judgment here, but I hate to do that, but we do see that they're mocking the evidence in front of them. So I don't know if anybody have any thoughts about that. I don't want to be dismissive of these folks by any means, but it is a function of how our heart responds to the gospel. John?
Have you ever seen someone raised from the dead?
No.
Okay. You're asking what might be their frame of mind. I think that might be it. I've never seen anybody raised from the dead. I haven't actually talked to anyone that's seen someone raised from the dead. That, from all I can tell, when people die, they rot. That they go away. So
Okay, so,
I mean, so I mean, I think they can make a logical argument,
mhm.
but, you know, there's a lot more behind it, and fitting.
So you're kind of playing devil's advocate here, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, you asked a question,
Yep.
you're kind of dismissing them, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, I've never seen anyone raised from the dead, I don't think you have. Has anybody seen someone raised from the dead? You have? No. Uh, So, you know, maybe I should take that person's skepticism seriously. You know, how am I, so you're asking, how am I going to approach someone that says, I don't believe people were raised from the dead. I believe when we're dead, we're just like Rover, we're dead all over, you know?
Yep.
You know, put in the veterinary side of it. But,
And I would think too, and you know, as you try to acknowledge a skepticism, you know, there's almost an ROI involved here, right? Return on investment. Sometimes this can be a lifelong investment, and it could pay off. But how much effort do we put in to try to do that convincing, right? Because there's so many people out there, and there's only so much time. I don't know. Maybe again, I don't want to be dismissive here, but.
and I mean, I think we should be contemplating. I mean, you go over on campus, and you're going to find a lot of people that don't believe in a resurrection. And therefore, they don't believe in God, you know, because if there's no resurrection, they don't believe in a spirit life. They don't believe in the metaphysical at all. And so, you know, are we going to try to reach people like that? And if so, do I have kind of a game plan as to how I might convince them to consider that possibility seriously? So anyway, I mean, that's not, I mean, that's more than what we can do like in one class here, but I think we need, and what you're calling, what I'm getting is that you're calling us to be considering how we're going to reach people that are in different places in life. And I guess I'm jumping on board and saying, you know, we got to do some thinking, we got to understand where they are, and think, you know, how would I approach, how would I get them to even consider, you know, that there might be a being that's greater than we are.
I don't know what's going on here, John, but somehow we are connected with either a USB port or something. But I wanted to do a quick exercise. I've got on this slide here, and I mean no disrespect at all by the plan of salvation. Hear, believe, confess, repent, be baptized, remain faithful. So we all understand the acts of salvation, right? These are necessary. My question is this where it starts? Does here encompass the entirety of the human journey before the Bible? Because there are so many people who don't even know what the Bible is. And, you know, I think that probably a lot of times we jump straight into being baptized when most of the folks are way over here. What do they need to hear to really start to understand that they've got a God that created them, that they are created beings to begin with, right? So how do we make that relationship? How do we establish that basis? Kind of like what Paul's doing here. So, you know, what is the human journey? What are people seeking? How are people seeking God? An evolutionist. How is an evolutionist seeking God? Any ideas? I mean, they're all about trying to figure out where they came from. So their thoughts are going into these different, mechanisms about how life came from random chance and how these things can add up together. That's kind of how I would fill in that blank. There's something inside them that says, I'm trying to answer the question where I came from, right? And so how can they be reached? Peter?
The more I've studied the Bible and going into kind of like extra biblical plus apologetics of the Bible, it really seems to me that Christians in general have really lost some ground where Christianity really pushed the sciences and through and Middle Ages, that time period, we really kick-started a lot of this digging into the sciences, digging into, well, God created all this, how can we order the world around us and make sense of what God has created? And somewhere along the line, we surrendered that ground to the scientists who don't believe in God, who believe that just science when in fact, like, science was our ground. It was like the proof, the evidence of a creator, of a loving God. And if we use the sciences to build a case and show evidence that, no, all of this science, all of this points towards a creator, points towards something intelligent designing all of this and setting it in motion. It gives evidence towards the truth and the evidence of God.
So I think there's an element. I think there's an element in there too, Peter, of stepping back and using a little bit of common sense as well, right? So, kind of going back to what I said the last time, what's the probability and likelihood of these events happening to get us to where we are today? So in a way, science defeats itself, and so when I say apply a little bit of common sense as well, even Stephen Hawking, at the beginning of one of his books, talks about, there is creative design in all this stuff. Now, in his mind, that started at the Big Bang and set things in motion. But, even in his mind, he agreed that there was a creator. He was applying a little bit of common sense to what he saw in front of him, because he said, this is too not random to have occurred by random. So at some point, common sense kind of takes over. And, the science can only go so far, right? Okay, so I would suggest they can be reached by appealing to a sense of common sense and, how does this pass the sniff test? Is what I would say. Nope. This may not be the best exercise. I'm not getting a lot of engagement at the moment, but I thought we'd get some mileage out of this. How about an atheist? Somebody who actively believes there is no creation. How are they seeking God? Yeah.
I would say through adversity, because no matter how poor, how old, how young, whatever you go through in your life, you get to a point where you feel like this can't be all there is. This can't be all of it. My relationships aren't working, my job isn't working. However it goes through in your mind, people are naturally going to look for another answer, I would imagine. Or they'll go through their whole life being good people, and they never needed God. They just never needed it. Or whatever they're doing was good enough.
So
You can put a seed into that when there's a person in need. You can plant that seed in any way you can, out of kindness or an example. It will grow. It will grow in that person that has a need.
So I think you said something right off the bat there. So they've had something where they've disavowed God. They've actively denying that there is a God. And in a sense, that has become their God. So what kind of conditions have led up for them to do that? It's something you got to unpack and unwrap on an individual basis, right? So in a sense, their God has become denial of God. So it's up to us to try to help them unpack that. Theistic agnostic. What is a theistic agnostic? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's right. I think some of these Athenians fit that picture. Certainly in some of the disciplines we read about, they believed there was a creator, didn't know who it was, right? So how do we introduce them to the God that we know as Jehovah God and convince them of that? We may not answer all this stuff to our satisfaction tonight, but I'm trying to get us to think about, these people exist. These are real human beings out there with these type of questions inside them. And I can tell you that, I think at various times I probably would have qualified as one of these folks. And then when I started going through some really difficult times, I realized that the only person in this world wasn't a person after all, but the only way I was going to get out of my mess is turning to the God that created me. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say that I feel like the theistic agnostics are probably one of the easier people to show God to, because they're actively searching for something. They are thinking like, oh, there is a creator, I just don't know who the creator is. So then that's kind of where, like,
I can appreciate the creation story in the Bible and the lineage that leads us from that creation story to where we are today. I don't see that in any other religion. I've never found it. There are individual instances of creation. I can't remember what it is in Hindu. It's blank my mind, but it's discorporated. It's not connected in the way we see it in the Bible, right? And the Bible, God, says He's the Creator. So, and we have souls, and I think even in the things we see in nature around us, help us explain that this is the God we're looking for. Just some food for thought. Aboriginal tribesmen, middle-aged housewife in Denmark, all these people are seeking God in one way, shape, or form, and we don't need to go much further down than that, right? But this is the equation we're trying to solve. Folks who are seeking something, how do we help them unpack that and show them that Jehovah God is who they're seeking, and to build that relationship? Matt.
Paul kind of gives us at least a template for the people he was talking to, and I think it overlaps into other categories, maybe more than we realize. Of course, he's got this theme, the unknown God, right? But if we take that out and look at the other parts of the message, he is explaining things that are really unexplainable with their viewpoints, with their understandings of the world, whether they would consider those to be religions or not. With their understanding of the world, there's a God who doesn't need a temple. He's greater than all, right? So that makes sense. It's just intuitive. It's common sense. Well, yeah, God's really great. We can worship Him, but He doesn't need a house.
Nothing made with gold and silver by our hands, right?
Amen.
Right.
And so then he goes on and he builds on that. He says he's the one who gave life and breath and all things. Well, that's a problem. John was talking the other evening about the simple cell. How did the simple cell arise? And I would add to that, how did life arise from non-life? God gave the breath. That's how. Doesn't really make sense. There's not another good explanation. And we could go on down through here. There's an element, verse 27, that it's right, it's appropriate, that humans should seek for God, grope for Him, try to find Him, that is our part in life, to grope and to find what's out there. Well, I think we just kind of are on that mission, Christian and non-Christian and Hindu and Buddhist, naturally. We just kind of have this vacuum. He's put eternity in our hearts. So look, that's this. What's out there? And so all of these things, Paul is explaining. I'm going to truncate my economy. He shows how this fits things that you have a hard time explaining with your worldview, with your explanation of how life works. And then there's action required on your part. You have to change. Commands all men everywhere to repent. And by the way, there's going to be a judgment. Now he's appealing directly to the conscience and really bypassing all these philosophical discussions that they may have. In your heart, does that resonate? In each individual, either they know they're unworthy as a person, and whether they acknowledge God or not, are they really a good person to a God-like standard or not? Well, the people who turn away from that appeal are going to be the ones who are mocking at the idea of a resurrection.
And I turn back to one of my thoughts, Matt, as well. What do I owe my God? I owe Him my heart, my repentance, everything. So He's trying to help them in that direction.
So again,
Yep.
these are things that are going to resonate if they are seeking Him. At the end of the day, people have to want God. And if we don't want God, we got a wall up. There's no way to get through that wall if they don't want to bring it down.
Yep.
So he just throws several things out there that we can learn a lot from.
It's daunting, the amount of work in front of us, but we can take solace in the thought that we found our God, and we want to continue that relationship. And that's why we're here. Elliot?
I think for all of those and pretty much any other situation, the approach is really the same in a lot of ways. If there's this thing to be sold to someone, someone comes to my door and they try and sell me something, I am very unlikely to want to buy it. But if I'm at work and I'm talking to one of my coworkers and I'm talking about this problem I'm having, they're like, oh, this thing will fix that problem. I'm much more likely to buy that item, even if it's even the same item that the salesman was trying to sell me. And so it starts with us building relationships with people and then displaying hope in our lives. And I think that's the best way we can reach people, regardless of what situation in life they are, whether what they believe in, is it starts with relationships with others.
All right, well, I'm going to attempt to go through chapter 18 in about 5 minutes here, so I don't do a disservice to Matt and run over. So just a couple things I wanted to point out here in chapter 18. We'll move on. Paul had departed Athens, went to Corinth, and I think it was, I'll just put out a couple of real quick notes here. From what I've read in some of the other source material, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians was written, I think, when Paul was here in Corinth. So he just left Thessalonica, but he's writing him letters, right? Just to put that in context. He hooked up with Aquila and Priscilla in Corinth. They were tent makers. And I just want to point out here that he, in verse 4, he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, persuaded both Jews and Greeks. And when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. But when they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook his garments and said to them, "By your blood be on your own heads, I am clean. From now I will go to the Gentiles." So, in just reading through that short those passages right there, it seemed like Paul was doing some reasoning there, and Silas and Timothy showed up, and then it seems like he had upped the, I don't want to say pressure, but the dialogue a bit, right? Because what happens is some of them put up their resistance shield here, right? In verse 6, they opposed him and blasphemed. So I'm not sure what the arrival of Paul and Silas and Timothy had to do with that, yeah, that's. Any thoughts on that? I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, honestly.
There's some comments in First Thessalonians about that they've been given some information about the brethren that they had stayed behind, like in Philippi and those cities that they had been to previously. They were giving some reports on how they were doing. But anyway, but that First Thessalonians has some comments along those lines.
Okay, well, but I did have one other observation in the reading before we close. I wanted to point out that later on, he departed from there, entered a house of a man named Justus, and Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his household, and many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. And when the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision, okay, let's go down here, and when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat. So something happened here in Corinth when Gallio became the proconsul. The Jews decided they were going to, this was their time. And they said, "This fellow persuades men to worship God contrary to the law." And when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crimes, O Jews, there should be no reason why I should bear with you. But if it is a question of words and names in your own law, look to it yourselves, for I do not want to be such a judge of such matters." And he drove them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio took no notice of these things. Poor Sosthenes, right? So, just reading through this without going a lot into any other source material, it seems to me Sosthenes stirred up the Jews to start making accusations against Paul when Gallio came in and thought, "Here's our chance," right? And then Gallio said, "Nope, not having any of that." And so they went back and took it out on Sosthenes, right? That's kind of my take on what's happening here, but anybody have any thoughts on that particular situation or scenario? No. And that's okay, because we're... John?
I was just going to say, verse 7 reminds me of what Paul did in Acts chapter 19, verse 9, when he says, "When some were becoming hardened in disobedience, speaking evil reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. And so he took the disciples away from those Jews causing the problems, where he could teach them more readily without being interrupted or sneered at or whatever. And so it seems like the same thing here when he went next door to the house of justice there, which is right next door to the synagogue. I'm sure they could probably hear some of his preaching next door.
Time to rub this guy out, right? Okay, out of time. Sorry that was rushed at the end, but Matt, you're on deck for Sunday.